when he was a 21-year-old UCLA student and a Panther leader in Los Angeles. He was convicted on the testimony of a witness who was identified years later as a paid FBI informant. The FBI conveniently lost their surveillance records showing that Pratt was in fact 400 miles away attending a Panther meeting in Oakland, California at the time of the LA murder. An ex-Panther facing the death penalty is Mumia Abu-Jamal, a radio journalist and former president of the Association of Black Journalists. He's still in prison after decades. After repeated harassment from law officers, he was shot when trying to stop police from beating his brother. An officer was killed by one of the bullets fired. Abu Jamal was charged with the death even though no weapon or ballistic evidence was ever produced linking him to the shooting. And he's still in prison today. In prison as of 1994, along with the Black Panthers, were former members of the American Indian Movement, including Leonard Peltier, who has been incarcerated for over 17 years. The Black Liberation Army members, members of the Republic of New Africa, a black separatist movement, Puerto Rican liberation activists, Irish nationalists, Chicano and North American anti-capitalist revolutionaries, community radical organizers, and peace activists. One Puerto Rican nationalist, Carmen Valentine, a housing activist, teacher, and organizer against police brutality, is serving a 98-year sentence for seditious conspiracy. Like his recent Republican predecessors, President Clinton has done nothing about any of these cases. Among U.S. political prisoners were the members of Plowshares, a peace group who jackhammered the concrete around a Minuteman missile silo in Kansas in 1984. For this protest action against nuclear weapons and demonstrating that, in fact, these weapons were first-use missiles because they weren't solidified against an attack. They were going to be used as a first-line attack. For this action, these protesters, 11 of them, were sentenced to 18 years in prison. Still in prison is Barbara Kurtzy Laman, a white working-class woman once active in anti-racist organizing in what she called an underground anti-imperialist movement. She was given 15 years for, quote, seditious conspiracy, and has been threatened with additional sentences of 265 years. Another white woman, Linda Evans, organized so effectively against racism that the Louisiana Ku Klux Klan put her on their death list. To protect herself, she purchased guns using a false identification. For this and for harboring a fugitive, Evans was arrested and sentenced to and is serving 45 years. Susan Rosenberg, a revolutionary advocate and former acupuncturist, was arrested along with an anti-capitalist associate, Tim Blunk, for weapons possession and false identification. Both were convicted of just that, weapons possession and carrying a false identification, and each was given 58 years, and they're serving that time right now, consistently being denied parole. Silvia Baraldini, an Italian citizen, was an anti-war activist and sympathizer of Puerto Rican independence and black liberation. Refusing to testify before a grand jury in the USA, she was tried for conspiracy and criminal contempt and has sentenced and is serving 43 years in prison. Along with Susan Rosenberg and a Puerto Rican nationalist, Alejandrina Torres, Baraldini was held for 2 years in the high security unit at Lexington, Kentucky, enduring windowless, unadorned cells, deprived of fresh air and human contact, and subjected to constant surveillance by a battery of cameras and hostile male guards. In time, their eyesight and health deteriorated. None of these people that I've mentioned, none of these people were ever convicted of assaulting or injuring anyone. Mark Curtis, a packing house worker, a labor unionist, and a leader of the Socialist Worker Party, was arrested in Des Moines, Iowa, and charged with having sexually assaulted a 15-year-old. He was severely beaten and knocked unconscious by police. The alleged victim said her attacker was 5 feet 6 inches tall, had smoke on his breath, and broke into her house. Curtis is over 6 feet tall, does not smoke, and was in a restaurant with a dozen other people at the specified time of the rape. After Curtis was convicted on the testimony of one police officer, one of the jurors presented an affidavit indicating that she believed Mark Curtis was not guilty and that she was one of 4 who voted for conviction even though they had grave doubts about the case. Curtis was sentenced to 25 years for sexual abuse and burglary, crimes he did not commit. During the Gulf War, some 2,000 military personnel were denied their requests for conscientious objector status and forced to go to war. At least 24 other service personnel refused on moral grounds to participate and were sentenced to military prison, some for as long as 6 years. A number of them were worked 12-hour days and fed starvation diets while incarcerated. In sum, political prisoners exist in the United States, and political prisoners receive grossly disproportionate sentences. They're routinely denied parole, even when qualifying for it, and are subjected to isolation, behavior modification, brutality, and other punitive treatments. Over the years, local and state police have worked closely with federal authorities to suppress anti-capitalist and other protest movements. The FBI devoted more effort to investigating the civil rights movement than to investigating the violence perpetrated against the civil rights movement. Those who engaged in the struggle against racial segregation in the South during the 1960s sometimes suffered physical assault and even death at the hands of white vigilantes, while police and FBI informants either looked the other way or actively assisted. Nowadays, police utilize billions of dollars worth of surveillance hardware provided by federal authorities against anti-capitalist groups and other dissident groups. In 1970, one police official declared that there were more law officers throughout the country, quote, on political intelligence assignments than are engaged in fighting organized crime. I don't doubt it. A Rand Corporation engineer has speculated that, quote, we could easily end up with the most effective, oppressive police state ever created, unquote. In various cities, secret police units, commonly known as red squads, spy on and harass lawful advocacy groups, sometimes poking into the private lives of public figures to embarrass or pressure them out of public life. Red squads have monitored hundreds of thousands of individuals and organizations. Perhaps one reason authorities cannot win the war on crime and the war against drugs, quote, quote, is that they're too busy fighting the war against political dissent. As part of that war, the FBI launched a counterintelligence program called COINTELPRO, which in effect is still in operation. It's designed to expose, disrupt, and misdirect members of progressive groups of any stripe. Working closely with local police red squads and private right-wing organizations, the FBI used forged documents, illegal break-ins, intercepted mailings, telephone taps, undercover provocateurs, and false charges. The Bureau has infiltrated various labor unions in attempts to brand them communist-controlled and has cooperated with management in the surveillance of strikers. In contrast to the way they treat the left, federal agents have done little to discourage violent right-wing extremist groups and sometimes have supported their activities. In San Diego, the FBI financed a crypto-fascist outfit called the Secret Army Organization, whose operations ranged from burglary and arson to kidnapping and attempted murder. The FBI organized 41 Ku Klux Klan chapters in North Carolina alone. Who is the FBI working for? Paid FBI informants in the Klan did nothing to stop Klan members and Nazis who committed murder and other acts of violence. This was true in Greensboro, where 4 radicals were murdered by Klan members who were assisted and directed by FBI undercover agents in the Klan. In some instances, the FBI informants assist the murderers by procuring weapons for them and directing them to the correct location where the murder is going to take place. U.S. military intelligence and the Chicago Police Red Squad jointly operated an organization called the Legion of Justice. Its members clubbed and maced protesters and anti-war demonstrators, broke into their headquarters, stole files, vandalized a progressive bookstore, and committed other acts of disruption and violence. In Chicago, after repeated death threats, Rudy Lozano, a Chicano union organizer and anti-capitalist who worked remarkably effectively to unite Latinos, African Americans, and working-class whites around working-class causes and issues. Rudy Lozano, this wonderful, many people called him a saintly man, he was shot dead in his home by someone who came to his door on the pretense of asking for a drink of water and who stole nothing. According to family members, paramedics who arrived at the scene thought they could save Lozano's life, but police blocked them from getting near him because, quote, evidence might be destroyed. Of course, the police never had a clue and never apprehended the killer. In instances of right-wing violence against the left, police rarely manage to catch the perpetrators. Political violence, as such, seldom bothers the authorities. It depends on who is using it against whom. Thus, when asked what they intended to do about the 15 or so right-wing paramilitary terrorist camps within the United States, a Reagan-appointed Justice Department official said the camps did not appear to be in violation of any federal statute. When 2 Chicano socialists were killed by bombs planted in their cars, the FBI made no arrests. When a powerful bomb wrecked the offices of several progressive and civil liberties groups in New York, injuring 3 people, the police made only a perfunctory investigation. After a series of threats, an anti-nuclear organizer was shot dead in Houston, and an assistant was seriously wounded. Police came up with not a clue. If this is democracy, who needs dictatorship?
You heard Lazy Law and Social Control, Part 5 in a 12-part series of commentaries by Michael Parenti. Michael Parenti is the author of many books, among them Democracy for the Few, Inventing Reality, Against Empire, and Dirty Truths. Here is a brief preview of our next issue of Radio Democracy.
Within the government there exists what some have called the national security state. It consists of the President, the Secretaries of State, the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is the military heads of all the various armed forces, and numerous intelligence agencies like the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA. The national security state often operates like an unaccountable sovereign power of its own. Its primary function is to defeat political forces that seek alternatives to free market capitalism, at home or abroad, or even forces that might try to introduce any kind of economically redistributive politics even within the existing framework. We often think that the United States is free of the kind of political crimes, assassinations, and death squads that characterize other countries. Well, think again. When agents of the Philippine dictator Ferdinand Marcos conducted operations against Filipino dissidents in the U.S., the FBI cooperated with these agents. One known FBI informant admitted to having witnessed the murder of 2 Filipino union leaders who were prominent in the anti-Marcos movement in this country.
Michael Parenti coming up on the next segment of Radio Democracy. For a copy of this talk and one other by Michael Parenti, please send $4 for 1 cassette and ask for Part 5, Lazy Law and Social Control. For the entire 12-part series on 6 cassettes, send $24, that's $24 for 6 cassettes, to People's Video Audio, Post Office Box 99514, Seattle, Washington 98199, USA. That's People's Video Audio, Post Office Box 99514, Seattle, Washington 98199, USA.